Most people will spend the next 365 days wondering why their life looks exactly the same as it did the year before. Same frustrations, same ceiling, same distance between where they are and where they intended to be. What they won't realize, what almost no one realizes, is that the gap between stagnation and extraordinary achievement is not measured in years of effort or decades of sacrifice. It is measured in the quality of a single ordinary day, repeated. In 2012, British cycling coach Sir Dave Brailsford introduced a performance philosophy that would go on to produce 8 Tour de France victories and an avalanche of Olympic gold medals. He called it the aggregation of marginal gains. The principle was precise. Identify every variable within a system, improve each one by just 1%, and observe what happens when those incremental gains compound simultaneously. What happened was historic. The British cycling team went from near irrelevance on the world stage to the most dominant force the sport had ever seen, not through revolutionary technology, not through genetic advantage, not through training volumes that dwarfed their competitors. Through 1%, repeated, across every domain, every single day. That principle does not belong exclusively to elite sport. It is the governing mathematics of human performance in every field, and the individuals who understand it at a structural level operate in an entirely different reality from those who don't. The first domain where marginal daily improvement produces outsized return is psychological orientation, the internal framework through which an individual interprets experience. Neuroscientists at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, led by Dr. Richard Davidson, spent over 2 decades mapping the neurological architecture of emotional regulation. Their findings revealed something precise. The brain's capacity to reframe adversity, to extract strategic information from failure rather than simply absorbing its emotional weight, is not a fixed personality trait. It is a trainable neural circuit, and like any circuit, its strength is determined by how frequently it is activated. Every morning, the interpretation you apply to your circumstances, consciously or not, determines which neural pathways dominate the hours that follow. A threat-based interpretation activates the stress axis, narrowing cognitive bandwidth and reducing creative problem-solving capacity. A constructive interpretation keeps the prefrontal cortex online, preserving the executive function needed for high-quality decisions across the full arc of the day. The practical implication is this. Daily deliberate reframing of your interpretive lens is not a soft skill. It is a performance protocol. And every day you practice it, the circuit strengthens. The recovery from setbacks accelerates. The quality of decisions under pressure improves. The compound result, measured across months, is a fundamentally different operating capacity. The second domain is one that drives more organizational failure, more relationship collapse, and more professional stagnation than almost any other single variable: the precision of human communication. MIT's Human Dynamics Laboratory spent years equipping teams across industries with sociometric sensors, devices that tracked not just what people communicated, but how. The data produced a finding that fundamentally challenged conventional assumptions about team performance. The single strongest predictor of a team's output quality was not the intelligence of its members, not the clarity of its strategy, not even the resources available to it. It was the communication pattern between individuals. Specifically, the frequency, energy, and structural balance of information exchange. Most people treat communication as a transmission problem. Get the words right, deliver the message, move on. But high-performance communicators understand it as a systems problem. Every exchange either builds or erodes the relational infrastructure on which collaboration, trust, and influence are constructed. And that infrastructure is built or degraded one conversation at a time. The daily discipline here is precise. One conversation where you practice structural listening, decoding not just content but intent, emotional register, and the need beneath the words. One exchange where you prioritize clarity over volume. One interaction where you choose precision over assumption. Compounded across a year, that practice produces a communicator capable of generating alignment in rooms where others generate friction. Beneath communication, beneath psychological orientation, lies the foundational mechanism of all sustained high performance: executive self-regulation. The science on this is unambiguous. A landmark study published in the Journal of Personality tracked 1,000 individuals from birth to age 32. Researchers measured self-control at multiple points in childhood and then mapped outcomes across health, finances, career trajectory, and relationship quality 3 decades later. The correlation was striking. Childhood self-control was a stronger predictor of adult outcomes than intelligence, stronger than socioeconomic background, stronger than family structure. The capacity to override impulse, delay gratification, and sustain directed effort toward a distal goal is not a personality trait distributed randomly at birth. It is a skill, and it is built through the same mechanism as every other skill: deliberate, progressive, daily practice. Here is what the neuroscience of habit formation tells us about why this matters structurally. Every act of self-regulation that succeeds, however small, creates a neurological precedent. The basal ganglia encodes the pattern. The next iteration requires marginally less conscious effort. Over weeks and months of consistent practice, behaviors that initially demanded significant willpower become automatic, moving from the prefrontal cortex into procedural memory. The discipline becomes architecture. The effort disappears into habit. This is why the person who has maintained a 6 a.m. wake time for 6 months experiences it entirely differently from the person on day 3. The brain that executed that behavior 10 times is not the same brain that executed it 200 times. The circuit has been structurally reinforced. If you find this level of analysis valuable, Strategic World Insights publishes content at this depth consistently. Subscribe and make sure you never miss an upload. Time is the only resource distributed in perfect equality across every human being alive. A Nobel laureate and a first-year student receive identical daily allocations. What produces differential outcomes is not the resource. It is the allocation architecture applied to it. Cognitive psychologist Anders Ericsson, whose research on expert performance shaped our modern understanding of deliberate practice, identified a pattern consistent across every high-performance domain he studied. Elite performers do not work more hours than their peers. They work differently. Specifically, they concentrate their highest quality cognitive effort during peak neurological windows and protect those windows with structural discipline. The research on ultradian rhythms, biological cycles of approximately 90 to 120 minutes that govern cognitive performance throughout the day, shows that the brain naturally oscillates between high-focus states and recovery states. Most individuals ignore this architecture entirely, pushing through fatigue signals and attempting sustained performance across a flat, undifferentiated day. The result is that their peak cognitive hours, typically the first 2 to 4 hours after full waking, are consumed by low-value reactive tasks, while the work that genuinely requires depth gets squeezed into depleted end-of-day windows. Daily time management improvement means one thing with precision: systematically repositioning your most cognitively demanding work inside your peak performance windows, and batching reactive, administrative, and low-complexity tasks into off-peak periods. Even partial implementation of this architecture, protecting just 90 minutes of peak cognitive time per day for deep strategic work, compounds into hundreds of hours of high-quality output annually that would otherwise never have existed. Knowledge, accumulated deliberately over time, is the only asset that compounds without ceiling and cannot be confiscated. The World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs reports have consistently identified one variable as the dominant predictor of professional relevance across disruption cycles: learning agility. Not any specific technical skill, because specific skills have half-lives that are shortening with each passing year as automation and artificial intelligence absorb routine cognitive functions. The capacity to rapidly acquire, synthesize, and apply new knowledge frameworks is what determines who leads the next cycle of value creation and who is displaced by it. The daily discipline is structural, not inspirational. 15 minutes of domain-specific reading. A weekly deep engagement with a subject adjacent to your primary expertise, because cross-domain synthesis is where the most durable competitive advantages are constructed. A monthly audit of your knowledge portfolio: what is appreciating in relevance, what is depreciating, and where the next strategic investment of learning time should be directed. Warren Buffett has reportedly estimated that he spends 80% of his working day reading and thinking. Bill Gates schedules dedicated reading weeks twice annually. These are not indulgences. They are the core capital allocation decisions of individuals who understand that knowledge compounds the same way interest compounds, and that the returns are proportional to how early and how consistently the investment is made. Financial architecture deserves direct technical examination, because nowhere do small daily behavioral decisions carry heavier long-term mathematical consequence. Nobel laureate Richard Thaler's research on behavioral economics identified a systematic cognitive bias he termed present bias, the tendency to overweight immediate rewards relative to future ones, even when the future rewards are objectively superior. This bias is not a character flaw. It is a feature of human neural architecture shaped by evolutionary pressures that no longer match the environment we actually inhabit. Understanding it structurally is the first step to overriding it deliberately. The financial consequence of present bias, operating unchecked over a working lifetime, is measurable and severe. The individual who delays investing $500 per month from age 25 to age 35, just 10 years, and then invests the same amount from 35 to 65 ends up with roughly half the retirement wealth of the person who started at 25. Not because of income differences, because of compounding interrupted by a decade of present bias consumption decisions. The daily financial discipline is not complex in structure. Track expenditure with precision so the data overrides the emotional accounting that distorts perception. Automate savings and investment allocations before discretionary spending decisions are made, removing the behavioral decision from the equation entirely. And review monthly the gap between current trajectory and target destination. Small course corrections applied early are arithmetically trivial. The same corrections applied late require exponentially greater sacrifice. Embedded within every domain discussed, orientation, communication, regulation, time, knowledge, finance, is a deeper variable that determines whether the disciplines sustain or collapse under pressure. It is the structure of identity itself, the model an individual holds of their own capacity for growth. Carol Dweck's research at Stanford produced one of the most replicated findings in modern psychology. The belief system an individual holds about the malleability of their own intelligence and capability, whether fixed or expandable, predicts their response to challenge with remarkable consistency. Fixed model individuals avoid difficulty to protect a self-image built on current capability. Growth model individuals seek difficulty because they have internalized a different equation. Effort plus strategy plus time equals expanded capability, and expanded capability is the entire point. The daily practice of personal development, honest self-assessment, targeted skill acquisition, reflection on the gap between current and required capability is how the growth model gets installed and maintained as an operating system. Without it, the friction of early-stage learning in any new domain triggers avoidance. With it, that same friction becomes confirmation that the development process is working. And beneath all of it, beneath the disciplines, the frameworks, the compounding mathematics of marginal daily gain, there is a question that every sustained high performer must answer with structural clarity. Why? Research published in Psychological Science found that individuals with a strong, clearly articulated sense of purpose demonstrate measurably greater activation of the brain's motivational circuitry during effortful, uncomfortable tasks. They sustain effort longer before requiring recovery. They return to interrupted goals faster after disruption. They resist short-term temptation more effectively when the long-term objective is clearly defined and personally meaningful. Purpose is not a philosophical luxury. It is a neurological performance variable, and it is not delivered fully formed. It is constructed through repeated reflection on what genuinely matters, through honest examination of the gap between stated values and actual behavior, through the slow, deliberate alignment of daily action with long-term significance. When that alignment is achieved, even partially, something measurable changes in how the daily disciplines feel. The sacrifice required by delayed gratification registers differently when the future it is building has a clear shape. The discomfort of self-regulation becomes tolerable, even meaningful, when it is attached to something larger than the discomfort itself. Here is what the data, the research, and the observable pattern of every sustained, high-performance life ultimately converge on. Transformation is not an event. It is a sequence. It is the quiet, invisible, compounding consequence of decisions made in obscurity, before the results are visible, before the outcome is guaranteed, before anyone is watching. The individuals who achieve outcomes that look extraordinary from the outside are not fundamentally different from anyone else in any given moment. They are different because of what they chose to do in every ordinary moment that preceded this one. And the most strategically significant moment to begin that sequence is always the one you are standing in right now.